Going live, and it says you're live. Yay. All right. So we should be live. If we can, from those of you who are watching, if we can get a yay or nay on the audio. Tyler, you'll probably need to say some words.
This is me saying some words, big words. I'm saying massive words like encyclopedia, because that is definitely the biggest word I know. Because I'm a dum-dum.
Well, Peter always does yay with a question mark. It makes me... It's just so much fun. Yes, we can hear you. Okay. So you might have noticed something a little bit different. We'll talk about this once recorded as well, but there is a video of Tyler because we can't get his voice in video to sync up, and half the time he was freezing. So
yeah,
apparently
right now, Chrome's not liking me. Might be Discord too, but you know, we'll just for once not put all the blame on Discord. Just this once.
Hopefully next week we can get it to go back to normal. That'd be nice. Otherwise we'll have to try something different.
Mm-hmm. It'll be good. We'll get it to work. We'll beat it into submission.
I'm hoping that your usual MO holds true, and you're back on Linux next week.
Nah.
It's for sure an OpenBSD problem because he has to use Discord in the browser.
Yeah. I mean, I did get an update for Chrome last night, and I am running, the absolute bleeding edge of OpenBSD, so very well could be it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's why I told him he should switch to Windows.
Yep. I mean, Matt's obviously always talking to me about how I need to come over to the glory that is Windows. So I'm always just be like, no, please, no.
You'd probably get better video and audio quality on DOS.
Gross.
All right. I honestly think that we're almost ready to go.
Yes.
Which is, like, weird, right?
Yeah, it does feel weird. And speaking of that, let me make sure that there's nothing around the house that Buddy's going to chew up that's, like, valuable. I totally forgot. My mom left out, and so I have her dog in here with me, so I'm going to go put her, because she likes to, like, whine anytime Buddy's around. I'm going to go put her up and make sure there's nothing for Buddy to chew up and destroy real quick.
Okay.
I'll be back in just a sec.
Awesome. It is a nice tuck poster. I got that on Amazon of all places. Quite honestly, I was quite shocked that they have a lot of Linux stuff on Amazon. It took forever to get here, though. That shipping time was like 2 months. It was weird. I'm thinking about getting a different poster, though. I've had that one for a while. It's about time for something new. Wonder why he's not just using Firefox. Let's just try Firefox to see if that would work.
All right. The house is clear.
You need a room setup tour. Let me do. I'll do a room setup tour right now. My computer's in front of me. My bed's over there, and there's a standing desk behind me. That's the room.
Oh, come on, man. You got to show off all the junk in the room, too.
Oh, well, there's some of that, but not. I mean, it's not. It's fairly clean, but cleanish.
See, my room, you walk into it, and you're like, Oh, there's not much in here. It's pretty clean. I can show you the dirty. Just give me time. I'll show you the dirty.
All right. Mine's not too bad. It's been worse. Mostly because stuff gets shoved in this room.
Oh yeah. To answer Rick before we actually start recording, I am going to do the Rust stream today. My webcam and everything works fine on my end. It's just not through Discord at all.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we'll have to figure out something for next week because we don't want to do a video podcast with just half the podcast crew. That'd be bad.
Yeah.
But we'll deal with it for 1 week. It'll be alright. Is my bed open source?
I do like Peter's question. Yeah, please tell me it's open source. Come on, man.
It came from Overstock. That's all I bought. All I know.
Unacceptable. Come on, not buying Foss bedding. What are you doing? Do you even care? Come on.
All right. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and get started. I think we can get this done. So I'm gonna go. You ready to go?
Yep.
Have you done a test on Audacity to make sure it works?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm gonna hit record in Audacity. Then I'm gonna hit record in OBS. Then, and you can do the claps whenever you want. This is gonna be interesting.
Yeah. 3, 2, 1.
Not bad for not being able to see you, I suppose.
Yeah. That, at least on my end, that was noticeably far apart. Like quite a bit.
We can try again if you want.
I have no idea whether or not it's going to help, but we can do it again.
Let's just keep clapping until it happens. We just spend the next half an hour 3, 2, 1 like Scary Movie 4 or whatever. Damn it! Why is it always your 3? I'll just land them up the way it is. It should be fine. He says. Hopefully.
I mean, we could make it really easy by having two words that we say that are back to back. Like you say 1, and as soon as you're done saying 1, and I hear it, I'll say 2, and then you can line it up that way.
I think the claps probably. I'm used to the claps. They'll be okay. I won't have any video to line it up to anyways, other than yours. And I didn't edit the video last week at all anyways. I just left the stream up. I'll probably do
next week we can try Jitsi again, if you want.
We can try it. I mean, it's not gonna hurt anything. The transform for your video is gone anyways because I had to delete it, so we'll have to redo it anyway, no matter what. All right. Yep. I'm gonna have to cough for
you know me,
just a minute.
Mm-hmm. I'm always causing Matt work. I'm the best friend that he never wants to talk to because guess what? More problems.
It's all right. Somebody would just settle on a distro, I'd probably be perfectly happy.
I have, but you don't like the distro I've settled on.
I also don't believe you. I'm just gonna put that out there. Like, man, you're a good friend and you're a good, podcast host, but you are shit at staying on something. I'm just, no offense, but you're like me ages ago. You switch
You're
stuff.
Not wrong. You're not wrong.
You switch stuff all the time. And if you're gonna stay on OpenBSD, then we'll find a solution.
I mean, there doesn't really have to be a solution because anytime I want to play games, I have 2 NVMe drives that I can just swap out and instantly boot into Windows with all my drivers and everything installed. So next week, if we start let's just go ahead and get together early. And if it's not going to work out using OpenBSD, then I could just swap the NVMe drives out. It'll take me 2 minutes.
Do you have a spare PCI slot in your computer?
I do not. It's a mini ITX board.
Oh, that sucks. I was gonna say, if you had a spare PCI, you could get one of those extension cards so you could have both of them in at the same time.
Yeah. But sadly, it's a no-go.
Yeah. All right. Well, what can you do? All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and start us off. Hey everybody, welcome back to Linux Cast. I'm your host Matt.
And I'm Tyler.
All right. So if you're watching the video version of this after we're done recording, you'll notice that something's a little bit different. There is no Tyler on screen. He's on OpenBSD, and Discord in a browser is garbage, and actually more garbage than it is outside of the browser, which is amazing considering that it's Electron, right? Just putting that out there. It's horrible. So if you're watching the video version, you're just going to get my lovely face. You won't get to see Tyler at all today. We are exploring options for next week. We should have some kind of solution for next week so that we can get back to normal. But anyways, Tyler. I should say, actually, before we start, we should say that this is the Linux Cast. We talk about Linuxy things, in case the title didn't give it away. I'm just going to, say that. Tyler, what did you do this week in Linux and open source? We should broaden it a little bit, seeing as how you're not a Linux user anymore.
Yeah. Well, I've been happily using OpenBSD and ricing the crap out of my desktop and just trying to get everything sorted. Because I have the 6600 XT, which is supported by OpenBSD, just on the current branch, which is essentially like the testing branch of OpenBSD. I'm getting used to the quirks of using the current branch, the differences in using OpenBSD and Linux, getting the most performance I can out of it, and that's mainly what I've been up to. And we're also going to do a Rust learning live stream later on. Probably be watching some YouTube videos, and I've been told that I also need to use the Rust official book as like somewhere to start off at. Like, definitely. I've had like 4 people tell me that.
Do you have like a reason you're learning Rust, like something that you need to do in order to it has caused you to learn Rust? Or is it just for fun?
No, other than it's for fun, and I've wanted to learn Rust for a while.
Makes sense. I thought maybe you had to port something over, and that's the reason why you decided to. Because OpenBSD supports Rust, right?
Yep.
I'm assuming.
And Rust programs are awesome.
Well, I mean, obviously they're awesome. Everything's written in Rust, right? That's the way it is.
Exactly.
All right. So for me, this week spelled the end of my Gen 2 experiment. So Ben and I spent another hour, probably like Monday-ish, trying to solve screen tearing on Gen 2. And it didn't really matter what desktop environment I was using. I was still getting screen tearing. And it turned out for a while there I got it solved because we installed the X11 package. Because we just installed the X server when we installed. So I got that X11 package, and then I was able to turn on tear free and use vsync with PyCom, and it fixed it for about 5 minutes, and then it came back. And I have no clue what usually, because there's 2 tricks when you have screen tearing on Linux. There's using vsync with PyCom. Usually that takes about 80% of the screen tearing away. And then there's the tear free option, which you can either use with xrandr, or you can use in a file in in etc/x11 whatever. And I did both of those tricks. Normally, I mean, they never fail. Like, those are the tricks that you have to do, and they work. This time, they did not work. Like, it worked for about 5 minutes after we installed that X11 package, and it just, after that, it kept tearing. And I can't stand screen tearing. Like, I just can't stand it. It absolutely drives me nuts. It just takes me out of whatever I'm doing and causes me to rage in my head for about 5 minutes, and then I have to go back, and then it tears again, and it's a cycle that I just can't seem to get out of. So that's the end of Gen 2, unfortunately. I've talked to several people now who have, solutions, and I tried a couple of them. They just didn't work. one person even said, "Hey, use Chrome." Like, I don't really want to go use Chrome, but no. Ben and I even uninstalled the binary of Firefox, and then I compiled Firefox from source, hoping that would work. That did not work either. So we've pretty much tried everything that can be tried in there, and it's just not working. So yeah, Gen 2 is going to be officially off my system sometime this week. Slackware is going to be my next long-term review if I can get that installed, so that'll be fun. And the other thing that I did this week is I created an rsync script, something that I've been wanting to do for ages. Usually I just use the same rsync line over and over again. It's just, -AV and then the two directories, right? But there's a flag for rsync called --exclude, and it's life-changing because for the last 2 or 3 years since I've been using rsync to do my backups, I just back up everything in the home directory, and that means that every time I do a new backup folder, I have another copy of my music, another copy of my ISOs folder, another copy of my Steam games folder. So, I mean, I have like gigabytes upon gigabytes of extra copies of all that stuff. And now that I've decided to do this script, I've done the --exclude, and that means I don't back up the music, I don't back up the games folder or the ISOs folder, so it saves. I mean, backups are like really quick now, which makes me happy. So that was fun. It actually was a really simple script. So oh yeah, that was another thing that people told me to do, is just use Wayland. And that's one thing I didn't try. Maybe I should have. Maybe I will before I wipe it out, but I don't know whether or not I'd be able to do Wayland and still do videos, because I've had so much problems with screen capturing on Wayland. So plus, it would mean I'd have to install Pipewire. So, and we all know how Pipewire treats me. Just putting that out there. So, yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, that'd be worth your time.
Yeah, especially since I'm probably wouldn't stick with
sarcastically.
Yeah, probably. I'm not gonna stick with Gen 2 anyways. I don't think I've put so much time into it so far and wasted a lot of Ben's time. So, anyways, it was an interesting experiment. I'm glad I did it. I doubt that I would ever do it again. So, there you go. You never know, though. Who knows? Maybe I'll put up another goal. All right. So that is it for that section. Let's go ahead and move on to the contact information. You can contact us via email at thelinuxcast.org. You can subscribe to all of our stuff and find the blog posts and all that stuff at thelinuxcast.org. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/linuxcast. You can subscribe to Zany on YouTube at youtube.com/ZanyOG. All those links and stuff will be at the linuxcast.org/contact, and you can subscribe to the Linuxcast at youtube.com/linuxcast. We did go over 10,000 subscribers a few days ago, so that was pretty good. I'm still blown away by that, but it's also nuts. It seems once you hit 10,000, your subscribers just keep going. I thought we'd just stop. It was a little weird. I didn't expect it to still keep going, which is, I'm obviously stupid, but it was one of those things. Anyways, so thanks everybody who has subscribed. If you haven't already, youtube.com/linuxcast. If you just want the audio version, I should actually say this. So a few weeks ago, I did a video called State of the Linux Cast, where I was talking about I didn't really know what to do with the podcast. And for ages and ages, what I would do is we'd stream on Thursdays. I'd put it private towards the end of the day. I would then edit the video. The YouTube channel would get the video on Fridays. The Patrons would get it a day early. And it was a conglomerated mess. It was just not great. Like, it wasn't a process. It took a lot of time, and it definitely wasn't really something that I thought was worth it, simply because I didn't really know what people were getting out of it. So what I've decided to do, and you'll have noticed this because I've already done it for a week, is that the stream that we do on Thursdays will stay up. It'll stay live. That'll be the version of the podcast that YouTube gets. towards the end of the evening, I will put timestamps in. So if people want to skip around to the certain points of the podcast, that they can do that. I usually do that around 7 o'clock Eastern time. It takes me a little while to get back to my desk and actually do that. So if you want to watch the podcast on YouTube, that's what you'll end up doing. You'll watch the live stream, the recorded version of the live stream, and you'll have timestamps and stuff in order to move around. Patrons will get the audio version a day early. If you want to just subscribe to the audio version, that stuff is available at linuxcast.org and stuff. So, yeah, that is that's what's happening with the podcast. I doubt that I'll change it from now on. It worked really well last week. Hopefully it'll work well this week as well. So, moving on to the news. Tyler, what is your news this week?
My news is about Shotcut. For those who are like new to the FOSS space, there's pretty much two good FOSS video editors. There's Kdenlive and Shotcut. And in my personal opinion, Shotcut has been the lesser of the two for quite a while. And it's recently gotten a lot better and much, much more competitive with Kdenlive, and this last update is kind of just a example of how good it's getting. Not only are they using a newer version of FFmpeg, if you go through the article, there's quite a few different things about it that they've improved, including its improved audio and video synchronization, and there's a lot of just like quality of life improvements and sensible features that have been added. And if you want to go more, they do have obviously like the big changelog that you can go see, and it's overall a pretty exciting release. And I'm glad to see that both of the video editors in the FOSS space are getting just not a little better, a lot better, which is really good. I don't think that you could question that.
Yeah, I think I used Shotcut exactly one time. I didn't really care for it, but maybe it's time to try that again, because Kdenlive does this weird thing where when I try to cut something, it says I'm dragging the timeline, which I'm actually not. So and it dings at me, which bothers me. But I always just go back to it because it's the most full-featured thing. Everyone says good things about that that Olive, but that thing's like perpetually in alpha. Like it's perpetually in alpha, right? It's never moved beyond alpha software, and like apparently you can tell. Like it's like, and I mean I'm not like poo-pooing that because like the it's like one dude, right? Like I can understand why it hasn't moved past alpha, but if you're relying on something, you can't have it crash all the time. So, yeah. And no matter what, because it's pretty much Kdenlive's code base, like essentially it shares a lot of the same code base as Kdenlive. It suffers from pretty much all of the things that Kdenlive suffers from. And Kdenlive has obviously much larger development, like, time and power going behind it. So why wouldn't you choose Kdenlive? I mean, they all have to use that one. I don't know what the toolkit is called, but there's like that one toolkit that enables video editing on Linux that pretty much all the editors pretty much have to use. I don't remember what it's called, though. All right, so my news of the week.
Neither do I.
Yeah, I don't know. I could just be making it up. Who the hell knows? My news of the week is that Ubuntu Pro settings have been pulled from Ubuntu 22.04. So I just really wanted to talk about this. Is that when this first came out, like a few weeks or probably a couple months ago now, there's in the software and updates setting there was an Ubuntu Pro like tab or whatever in desktop Ubuntu, and people kind of freaked out about it, like, oh, is Canonical going to start charging for Ubuntu? And I mean, it was kind of as usual with the Linux community, it was blown out of proportion, but apparently it was a big enough of a scandal that Canonical has now pulled that out. But as far as I know, it was not actually ever going to be for consumers. It was a kind of like a subscription service for businesses for support. But it freaked people out because it was in the consumer version or whatever, if there's such thing as a consumer version of Ubuntu. I just find it interesting that any mention of charging for a distro just freaks people the fuck out. Like seriously, if they even like hint at saying we're gonna charge for support or something, people just, I mean, throw their arms up and like, oh my god, what's happening? The world is ending. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which is very weird. Like, what's the problem with them offering a like, even if it's a monthly subscription pro version, like you just get, I don't know, like 3 dumbass extra features. What's the problem? Like, you're not going to pay for it.
Well, yeah. As long as you're not being forced to pay for it, right? Like if the free version of Ubuntu went away, then maybe there would be something to be upset about. But that was never going to be this. This was just going to be like something that was buried in the settings panel that perhaps you could subscribe to if it was even meant for you, which it probably wasn't, for extra support or something. Like if something went wrong.
Well, I mean, like, I guess some people look at Canonical and think that they're much like they just don't give them any credit. Like, look, I don't hold Canonical in very high regard, but I also don't think that they're so dumb that they're going to take basic Linux features and put a paywall in front of them. Like, they're not that dumb. Like whatever whatever they offer, however, nifty it is, it's still not something that's going to be basic to using Linux.
Okay, so Canonical knows this one true fact is that proportionally not a soul uses Ubuntu desktop. Like hardly, I mean, compared to the people who use it on server, the desktop market is so utterly puny, it wouldn't even pay to offer this service. Like to employ the people who would have to support it full time to help the 4 people who would ever use it doesn't make sense. That's the reason why it was, when I saw this, I didn't even include it in like a news item or something, because I was like, there's no way in hell that they would ever do this for the consumer market. This is for people in the enterprise market that use Ubuntu terminals or maybe IoT stuff or servers or whatever. They just happen to also use the desktop. That's what that was for. Yeah. Like, there's just no way that they'd ever do it for the minuscule amount of people who actually use Ubuntu. I mean, there are probably millions of people who use Ubuntu or whatever, but the vast majority of them, or I should say, in comparison to the number of people who use the server compared to the number of people who use Windows, it's just so small it wouldn't even be worthwhile.
Well, and also, I guarantee you, like, it would be a massive shock to find out that Canonical didn't have one community manager on payroll. And if you think that community manager hasn't made it abundantly clear that trying to sell stuff to their target desktop audience is not necessarily not smart, but not going to work, is insane. Like, everybody knows the Ubuntu community. If the Ubuntu community consists of people who are not accepting of them monetizing the desktop in any way. So why would you try to add, like they've tried monetizing before. It has always bit them in the ass when they try and monetize the desktop.
Oh, people freaked the fuck out when they had the Amazon icon in the dock, like when they put that, which is basically, it was a link to the Amazon website that correlated with their affiliate link, right? That's all that ever was. Nobody ever had to use it. They didn't force you to keep it. Like if that had been Microsoft, you wouldn't have been able to delete the icon, and it would have launched at boot.
But when they included, like when they included the Amazon search results in the desktop search, like when you would search for applications and files and stuff, it would also bring up Amazon search results. I remember people claiming that was outright spyware because everything that you typed on the desktop would be sent to Amazon servers. And it's like, look, I mean, I'm not going to say that that's what I would want as a desktop, and I don't want my desktop to just give me Amazon search results. Like, let me make that clear. But also at the same time, it's not, do you really think that like Amazon would care to know? Like, Amazon doesn't sell messed up stuff. So if you have like, if you're searching for messed up stuff on your computer, it's really hard to like monetize a weird like file name. It's hard to sell you stuff based off of obscure file names. I don't I don't understand the spyware behind it, but I mean that's a clear example of their community not every way that Amazon Canonical goes about monetizing their desktop fails.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't assume like I don't get the fear of okay, they're about to monetize everything or give us a pro version and make us pay for like no, they pay people to understand what the people in the community want. At least I hope to God they do.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it seems like every decision Canonical makes stirs up an uproar of some kind. I mean, they tomorrow they could announce that their new colors are yellow and pink, and people would freak the fuck out. I mean, it would just be one of those things.
If they announced that they cured cancer, it would be terrible. The community would go insane.
Yeah.
The cure for cancer would be definitely like there would be wrapped up in a conspiracy. It would just the community doesn't accept anything that Canonical does, or even if they do accept it, it's at first with a whole bunch of like, a really intense magnifying glass on it. They have to inspect it very heavily before the community is okay with anything.
Yeah. Or get it out there, rip off the Band-Aid, and hope that the news cycle moves on to something different really fast. They've done that a couple times too. Look when they announced that they were going to get rid of 32-bit library support in Ubuntu. Like, not even get rid of it, just not include it by default. Like, you could still download it. People freaked out because, well, Steam still uses 32-bit, so all of a sudden Canonical became anti-gaming, personally, I don't think Ubuntu gives a crap about gaming. I mean, they make all of their money in the server, so they make no money from gamers. No. So, I mean, there's a reason why Valve didn't choose Ubuntu for the Steam Deck. Like, because they don't care about gaming. Not that I'm saying like the Arch people care about gaming, but they chose Arch just because they can do whatever the hell they want with it. They don't have to worry about some corporate overlord saying, "Hey, we want some attention" or something.
Well, I mean, it's the nostalgia that keeps people believing that Ubuntu cares about the Linux desktop. Like, that's how Ubuntu and Canonical started, was making Linux desktop relevant, a thing, something that you could actually use. But as they become corporate, their business, everything that they do revolves around the server. And so there's no interest in them to make the desktop user experience better, improve it. So we're left with the community projects like Arch or others that are based off of Ubuntu or, something else. Those end up being the ones that are doing the gaming stuff, that really innovating on the desktop side, because genuinely there's not a corporate interest on the server side that's where you dedicate all your resources. The community wants what the community wants, so they work on that shit.
What I'm surprised at is that Canonical hasn't done what Red Hat did. What Red Hat did was they split their desktop team off and created Fedora. And all Fedora cares about is the desktop. That's what they do. They create a desktop version of Linux that is based on Red Hat, right? And it tests Red Hat stuff and stuff like that. I'm surprised that Ubuntu hasn't done something similar to that. Now, I'm not saying that they'd say come out with something totally new, but it always feels like the desktop team at Canonical is the team that gets the worst offices, and they have their carpet is threadbare, and they get no attention. Like they get notified of meetings, but the time is always wrong, so they show up like half an hour late, because they're using like an old version of CalDAV or something. It just feels like they're not supported. I mean, it's probably not true, but it feels that way sometimes. All right. let's go ahead.
I mean, quite often.
Yeah, like a lot. Like you kind of feel bad for them sometimes. Like they've gone like. You can't get more Linuxy people than the last two guys who have led that team. Like I can't. His first name is Will. I don't remember what his last name is, but he was the desktop lead before Martin Wimpress was, and then Martin Wimpress was there, and they were there. They both worked at Canonical for a long time, and they've moved through desktop leads now really fast over the last like 3 or 4 years. Now some of that is that they were probably offered better jobs, but it makes you wonder.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the main topic. Now, this is a little bit of a weird main topic because it can be taken two ways. So the question that I have posed here is, does Linux need app parity? So we could take this to the point of, does Linux need the same apps as Windows has? We could talk about that. Or we could talk about instead open source software needing feature parity. So things like, does GIMP need to have the same functionality? Does it need to work, maybe not the same, but have the same features as Photoshop? Things like that. So let's start off with the first way. In order to be successful, Tyler, do you think that Linux needs absolute app parity between Linux and Windows?
To answer that question, I kind of have to ask another. By app parity, do you mean Linux needs the exact same apps on all platforms?
That's what I was. You could take it either way. It could be like Adobe needs to be on both platforms. Microsoft Office needs to be on both platforms, things like that. Or we could take it as the open source alternatives need to be feature parity, like they have to have the same features. It doesn't answer whichever one you like.
To be considered a financial or a commercial success, yes. It does, because that's when in the, I would say, computer space, the tech space, you end up being a success. Like Mac wasn't really a success until it had the big software for Microsoft, and then it started to take off. And in Mac's own specific areas, it shined compared to Windows, and it could actually compete. But commercially, I would say yes. If you want to consider Linux a success commercially, yes, it needs Adobe software. It needs all of it. Zoom, all of it has to work.
Yeah, I think I'm there with you, sort of. I think I more lean on, like, I don't think that in order to be a quote unquote success that Linux needs Adobe software. Like, I don't think that that's an absolute must-have. What is a must-have, if we can't have that, which we're never going to get it, is we need to have open source software that is equal to or better than what Adobe offers. So GIMP needs to get to the point where if someone is switching to Linux and has to switch then to GIMP, they can then do all the stuff that they could do in GIMP that they could do in Photoshop. And at the point we're at right now, you can't say that. Like, you can't tell me, no matter how good GIMP has gotten over the years, that it's as good as Photoshop right now in terms of feature parity. Same thing with like Kdenlive. We were talking about Kdenlive earlier. Kdenlive is a fantastic video editor. It has its problems, obviously, but it's definitely very good. But if you compare that to something like Premiere or whatever the one that Apple has, I always forget what that's called. Logic Pro, maybe, I don't know what it's called.
Final Cut.
Final Cut, that's it.
Final Cut.
But if you compare Kdenlive to those, there's not really a comparison there because those are obviously better. Now I think of all of the open source software that we would compare in this way, Kdenlive probably comes the closest to being feature complete compared to those other like mainstream offerings. but we don't have the same thing for, like GIMP or, like for example, Audition. Like Adobe Audition is a fantastic editor for audio, and it's what I used to use. And then when I came to Linux, I had to switch to Audacity. And if you look at Audacity compared to Audition, they're not even close to being as good in terms of UI, in terms of features and stuff like that. Now, it doesn't mean Audacity is bad. It just means that if you look at them, you can tell that there's some clunkiness in Audacity it's not really there in Audition. And it's the same thing with, like, if you look at something like Illustrator, something like that, and stuff like that. We don't really have a piece of software that does a good job for, like, why can I never remember the name of Adobe's products for whatever reason? The one that does graphics animations, the After Effects, that's what it's called. Like, we don't have a really good one that does After Effects. Now you can use Blender, and Blender is really good, but it's also complicated as fuck and not really meant for that. It's meant for 3D model. It feels like it's meant for 3D modeling, but Blender does so much stuff. It's just hard to do it, and that's one of the places where they've taken the feature by feature thing and kind of like crammed it all into like one application, which really has always bothered me. But that's where I come down on this whole thing, is that I don't think we need those applications to be successful, but we do need applications that can compete with them. And has been by far the longest and hardest problem we've had to solve on Linux for the last 30 years.
Well, but I mean, if we're going to be completely honest, you have to define what is your definition of success? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, that's obviously something that we'd have to talk about, right? But I have another topic in the folder. Like, do we even want Linux to be mainstream? But the real question I would ask back then is well, I mean, all right, so I'll just go ahead and answer it then. What is success for Linux? I don't know. Some people are going to tell you that they want,
and see, like, that's the thing. No, go ahead.
I was like, some people will tell you that it's market share, like that they'd want to have reasonable market share compared to Windows, and I think that's just silly. I don't think that first of all, I don't know that we would want that many people using Linux, because then it becomes more of a target. But also, it's unrealistic because it's just never going to happen. But more, I think for me, success becomes when other, like, corporate entities are interested in developing for Linux. So when someone other than Steam or Valve has decided that gaming is important on Linux. So, like, let's just say Epic decided they wanted to bring their stuff back to Linux officially. Other game developers, maybe like Microsoft or something.
Well, but see, by that definition, or by what you're saying, Linux, to be successful, must become mainstream, because the only way for corporate entities to ever take an interest in developing for Linux, it must have the user base to support that. So, yeah, like, essentially, your definition of success is, well, commercial success. It has to be commercially viable, and when that is your definition of success, the only way is for Linux to be successful is for it to become mainstream. And if the idea of it going mainstream is something that you don't like, then we kind of have to change our definition of success, because at that point, Linux is already successful. I mean, if you can't make the definition of success be commercially viable, or that doesn't appeal to you, that's not actually the type of success that you want for Linux, then I think the only other version of success would be that it's usable and it continues to be usable. And that's exactly what Linux is doing. It's gotten only better at it.
Yeah.
And
see, the thing is that when you look at markets and stuff like that, we're going to get into the problem with capitalism with Matt. But the problem with capitalism sometimes is that companies are always looking for huge markets. But the problem is that Linux is a huge market. Like, even if you just look at the desktop usage, like millions of people use the Linux desktop. Millions of people around the world use the Linux desktop. Is it the billion people that use Windows? No. Like, compared to Windows, it's a minuscule amount. But it's only when you make that comparison where that you think, like, and I understand that companies like Microsoft, companies like Apple want to always invest in markets where billions of people are going to be using their products. But just because it's millions of people doesn't make it any. It's still a good size, a number of people, right? So we're never going to get to the point where there's a billion people using Linux. I mean, not regular Linux.
Well,
like
we easily could. We easily could. The problem with that is for us to get to the point where we have that many users, essentially we have to become when you say market, the problem is in the open source FOSS community, we describe markets as users. And to a corporate entity, users means shit. Users doesn't mean anything. Facebook might tout their users publicly, but inside of their boardrooms, users don't matter. How much are we selling? How many
much money?
Advertisements are we giving them?
Yeah, and the one thing we know about the Linux community and the Linux users and FOSS community in general is that they don't spend money. Like, they don't
or they're
spend any money.
Yeah, they're at the very best. They're lenient with the amount of money they spend.
Yeah.
They might give over some, especially if you're doing a really good job, which is something that a corporate entity doesn't want. Like, that's too much of a risk.
Yeah.
Like, as a corporate entity, you kind of want people to essentially buy, and then if they don't like it, it's okay. Like, take their losses and move on. And that is not the FOSS community. Like, if you're asking money for something and what you provide is not excellent quality, no one's purchasing it after the first 5 people. Like, right. It's dead.
Well, the problem with my argument is not that there's not millions of people using Linux, which there are. It's that those millions of people aren't interested in, for the most part, and generally, spending a ton of money on what would essentially be proprietary software. Most people who use Linux on the desktop, to varying degrees, are more interested in FOSS software, and no company on the planet is going to ever, at least, go from making billions of dollars in a certain way to entering a market where they have no capability of earning hardly any money. Like, they're not going to enter into a market where the norm is to give away whatever they create for free. And when you, like, we were just talking about it with Ubuntu, like, anytime anybody mentions paying for Ubuntu, people freak out. It would be the same thing with literally anything else. They would have the companies have one expectation of making a product and then charging people for it, whether it's through a software as a service or, buying a $70 video game. You know what I mean? With the FOSS community on the other side, they have an expectation that the most of the stuff that's free and open source is going to be free of charge. And that's, every time we talk about money on the podcast, the views just tank because people don't want to talk about this. Like it's an old thing that we've beat up many, many times. It's a dead horse at this point. But it's blatantly the truth, right? It's that, in order for companies that make proprietary software to come to Linux, there not only has to be people, which we have people, we have enough people that would probably make some companies, at least, maybe not the big ones, but at least some of them at least be interested in bringing their software here. The problem is that we have nobody who's actually willing to pay for that software because either it's proprietary or because they're stingy, right? So that's where I bring back to my original argument, is that in order for there to be more success, I'm not talking about fully mainstream success, in order for more and more people to actually be interested in using the Linux desktop, there has to be feature parity within inside of the FOSS apps that are already here, because those FOSS apps have no expectation of ever being profitable, right? GIMP doesn't really care. They're not in it for the money. They're not in it for, I mean, they would like to make enough money to pay their developers, and that's about it. And you can do that from donations and, you know, corporate sponsors and stuff like that. Same thing with like Audacity, which is no longer a good example because they're owned by a corporation now. But things like Firefox, even, right, allowing these applications to bring up the feature to the point where we can honestly say that Firefox or Audacity or whatever, you know, Element even, you know, Element is, you know, feature complete. It's not, maybe not feature complete, but feature parity to whatever they're competing against. If we can get to that point, then we can see some measure of success, however you measure success, more people using Linux.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like, Linux, I don't think needs more people using it. I genuinely don't, because that's one of the problems with Linux is there's so many people coming over to use Linux, mainly because it's getting to a point where it rivals what they used to use in what, like, with the software that it'll run. And Linux, like, to bring it back to the title, like, does Linux need app parity? Yes, it does. If you want it to compete against the other OSs for some reason, whatever that reason is. But honestly, no, it doesn't need app parity. That's kind of the last thing that it needs. Linux is one of those things where it's not for everybody, because it doesn't run every piece of software, and it doesn't have the money behind it, nor do the people that run Linux want it to have the money behind it like Windows or Mac does, because let's be honest, when you have that much money behind something, people get pretty crooked. People will do some pretty messed up and really nasty and disingenuine or distasteful stuff just to make more money. And sadly, I don't think any of that interests anybody in this community, which I actually don't know why I said sadly. That's not really a bad thing. But when you want it to compete, you're not ever going to do that because you don't bring in any of the interest. Like, your goals are not aligned with what you think you want. Like, don't really want the corporate interest. You don't really want all of the people who make the software that you think it, like, to me, the craziest idea is we need to get the same software so that more people will come over and use what we use, but the people who make the software that we would like to have over here so that we can draw in more people is made by people that we hate. Like, nobody here in this community thinks Adobe is a great company. No one here thinks Microsoft, is the most genuine giving entity out there. They're practically, a good giving God. Like, no, come on. No one believes that.
I mean, we've already said, though, that we don't think that Adobe or Microsoft are ever going to bring things to Linux. That's why we said, or at least why I said, that having feature parity in the open source apps that exist is the more apt way to go. But
that also, to be able to get that type of feature parity, we need to be able to pay the high end, very intelligent devs. We have to be able to pay them for that time, because I mean, it's not that we don't have very talented devs here on Linux. Like, that would be an erroneous statement. We obviously do, but we're getting their spare time. We're getting their downtime. So for us to be able to compete and have that type of feature parity, we have to be able to pay them, which in of itself is it's a paradox. You'll never be able to get it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've made strives towards it, obviously, but I mean, you're right that it's not ever going to happen fast.
Well, see, the problem is it won't ever happen because while the proprietary companies, however much we disagree or don't like them, if they are able to pay the talented devs that we get spare time from, pay them for a majority of their time to develop their software, the it will never get to a point where we will catch up or have feature parity with them. It will never happen because during the day, the same devs that are trying to get whatever they're working on during the day working on here, in their spare time, it can't happen. It never will. And
yeah, see, I disagree.
Kind of,
I disagree with you because I'm not saying like it's going to happen for every single application that we have. It's not going to happen for, GIMP, Krita, Firefox, everything. But we've seen that it can happen with some things. Like there's a reason why OBS, which is open source, has taken over the world in terms of streaming. That is now the thing, and it's open source, right? So it has happened. I mean, maybe you would just consider that the exception to the rule, but there's other options, other things out there. Like Blender is another example of something that is.
Yeah, but you're talking about FOSS software. Like that's already FOSS.
Yeah,
so
I know.
we don't need the feature parity there.
Right, I know, but the reason why it's successful is because it had competitors that it then beat out because it was better. And it started out as FOSS, right?
Yeah.
So the point is that you writing off every other piece of FOSS software, saying that it can never be as good as Photoshop is just, I mean, it's defeatist, right? And I'm not saying that it's
it's not defeatist. Like, because here, like your example of OBS is a good example, but here's the problem: name the competitor that OBS was against.
XSplit.
Precisely. Did you ever try to use XSplit?
Well, no, but I mean, I'm just saying that it did have competitors. There's also that thing from Blackmagic that a lot of people still use. I'm not sure what it's called anymore.
But that costs a ton of money.
Well, I'm sure. As if the applications from from Adobe don't also cost a lot of money. Just because the competitors are expensive doesn't really make people not use them.
Well, but see, the thing is XSplit hasn't done well. It's, as far as I know, XSplit is still active. As far as I know, I don't know anyone who uses them, but they're still active. But the reason they can't compete is because they're not innovating, at all. The programs that you want feature parity with, like GIMP and Photoshop, is a great example because GIMP is fantastic. I would not pay for Photoshop because there's a lot of stuff that Photoshop does that I don't need, and it's way overboard for me. But that being said, GIMP and Photoshop will never be feature parodied because Photoshop is the innovator. Same thing with Adobe Premiere and Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve. All three of those are innovators in their own right. DaVinci Resolve, even though DaVinci Resolve, Premiere, Final Cut are all video editors, DaVinci Resolve innovates constantly on color grading. They are literally the best, and they're constantly innovating. Same with Final Cut. Premiere is actually falling behind because they're only getting pretty much worse as it goes on. So the problem is like there will always be competitors in the open source versus commercial market, that the commercial ones will, as long as they continue innovating and paying these developers the proper amount. Like a good example is Adobe. We all know that it's not really hard to find their positions and stuff that they've hired for in the past. They're not, taking in the bad developers. Right. They definitely are paying good money and have good stuff. XSplit, I don't know that XSplit even I don't even know if they ever hired for developers. Have no idea. So, I mean, that's really the thing. Like the innovators in the space, it's going to be pretty much impossible to ever compete with them because they're able to pay for the top-notch developers.
Well, I understand that asking GIMP to be as good as Photoshop tomorrow is unrealistic, and that it may never catch up, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that shouldn't be strived for, and it doesn't even necessarily mean that they had to be 100% always on equal ground. Like the minute Photoshop brings out a feature, GIMP has to have it, right? That's just not really what I'm saying. What I'm more saying is that by saying, well, it's never going to happen, so we shouldn't do it, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, of course we.
Well, no.
If we had the attitude of like we can't win, therefore we shouldn't play, the Detroit Lions would never play football. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, if that was the attitude we had, we wouldn't have like half the NFL, because half of the NFL couldn't play. It's the same thing here. Is that we shouldn't? That shouldn't be the mentality that we should take. And I also don't think that it doesn't.
Well, so essentially, what you're saying is not that we should have app parity, but we should have good FOSS applications like that, because when you're saying feature parity, you mean we're going to have everything that the commercial offerings have. And Blender is a good example of it. Blender is not an industry standard, even though plenty of people would have you believe it is. It is not an industry standard. It does do pretty much, like, you can do insane things with Blender. It is mind-blowing what you can do with Blender, and there are plenty of jobs out there that you can get that utilize Blender. That being said, Blender does not compete in the commercial market very well. And even though it doesn't compete in the commercial market very well, that doesn't mean that a ton of people don't use it, and it's massively there is plenty of stuff in game development that I've done over the course of my life that I just would have never even had the opportunity to learn about because I couldn't spend $5,000 on Maya or whatever other alternatives there are. So like to me, I think what you're saying is we just need really, really high quality FOSS applications.
Well, that and the mentality. I think we need the mentality of that. We should strive for some sort of feature parity, maybe not 1-to-1, but not being afraid to, when Photoshop does something good, bring it into GIMP. I think that they do that, and I think that it's all about motivation. If they have that motivation to, do this, and then it will always continually get better. And yes, you're never going. One of the reasons why OBS is actually not a very good example of this is because it became the mainstream so fast. It never really, like, people use OBS, they don't give a crap that it's open source. You know what I mean? And the FOSS aspect of it doesn't really matter to the vast majority of people who use it. They don't use it because it's open source. They use it because it's the thing to use. It's not only is it's free, like, as in you don't have to pay for it, but also it's really, really freaking good. And unless it screws me over, which it does about half the time, right? But I think that one of the reasons why it was so successful is because you're right in that the competitors weren't all that big to begin with. And the problem we have with things like GIMP and Audacity and things like that is that the companies and software that they're competing against are so entrenched into the workflow of so many millions of people, it would be impossible to get a toehold into it, even if they managed to reach feature parity. And that's why I don't think that should be the goal. I think instead it should be, I think app parity or feature parity should be the goal, but with kind of in a realistic way, and that it's more of a motivating factor. You know what I mean? Try to chip away to the point where, you know, you have some success. It doesn't have to be all the success. That's one of the problems with like everything, is that when you reach some success, you always have to reach for the next level and the next level. The you know, you always have to keep getting bigger, and that's, you know, so I think that that's one of the areas where maybe things like GIMP could be okay, is that, you know, they could be happy with, you know, a couple million users. You know, they don't have to continue to, you know, as long as they can pay their bills. They don't have a capitalistic idea of we have to make billions of dollars. They just have to be good. You know, let's make sure we can pay those good developers and then move on. You know, we don't have to have, it's a non-profit organization, you know, and just move on that way. All right, I think we've kind of beat the crap out of that topic. It's interesting that we disagreed there for a while. We don't disagree very often, but anyways. So it is the time of the week, Tyler, where we explore things, and because we're too lazy or not creative enough, we've decided to name this section the Thingie of the Week. So, Tyler, what is your Thingie of the Week?
My Thingie of the week is a fantastic. I mean, this is genuinely one of the most chef's kiss, beautiful patches I have ever found. It is amazing. If you like running DWM and you're like me, and you also like running PyCom with rounded corners, because, you know, why not?
You just balling like that, man.
DWM. Exactly. You
you
just want that.
You're the
nice
kind of guy who would
touch.
put spinners on a 1995 Chevrolet Beretta, aren't you? You're just that kind of guy.
I will not dignify that with a response, because you already know the answer. DWM has I found this. I believe it's just a completely custom, like some dude on the internet hand wrote this nice little patch that you can't really, as far as I know, it's not really put anywhere like officially, but in the show notes I did leave a link to the specific GitHub patch. Like if you click on this, you'll just download the patch or load it up in your web browser, and you can take a look over it. But this patch here adds rounded corners, just like in PyCom, but to DWM itself. And that means you'll get rounded corners without PyCom. You don't have to use PyCom to get rounded corners, or a specific compositor, which is awesome. And then if you're using a compositor like PyCom and using the rounded corners, I can't remember what issue I was having, but there was some weird issue with rounded corners. I think what it was like when like I had transparency or some Gaussian blur, something like that applied in the PyCom config, I would get the little squares, even though the corners were rounded, I would get the complete frame of the window with like the color of the background or whatever like that behind it, and it was noticeable. I could see it. With this patch, it got rid of that, which is awesome.
Oh, that's too bad I don't use DWM anymore. I could try this.
You know, it's all right. You'll come back to the best window manager.
Okay, so
just takes time.
The thing is when I was doing Gen 2, I installed and patched up DWM in order to use it, because my i3 system was broken. Because my config is meant for i3 gaps, not regular i3. And the thing is that I was like, there's some things about DWM that I really do miss. Like the look of DWM is really cool. I really like it. I like the way that it's configured. But it does not handle workspaces very well on multiple monitors, and I can't get past it, man. I'm immediately miss the ability to use a dedicated key binding to go to a workspace on this monitor. Like, in order to switch to a workspace on this monitor when you're focused on monitor 1, it's a 2 key binding process, and it just. Not for me. Not anymore. There's things about DWM that I miss, but man, i3 is good. So good. Anyway, so my app of the week is not actually an application. Well, I mean, it has an application. Itchy nose again. My is Mulvad VPN. Now, I know what you're saying. A YouTuber talking about a VPN. I'm gonna stop listening now. But this is not a sponsored advertisement. Nobody sponsors me. The point is, I was looking for a VPN, and I put a call out in Discord and on Twitter asking for options, because I was gonna go with PIA, because PIA offers 3 years of service for like $80, and that's like, holy crap, that's really cheap, right? Like, but the problem is when you see a price that cheap, you wonder, am I gonna get what I pay for? You know, is this telling you it's a VPN, but it's not actually a VPN? You know, so I was worried about it. That's the reason why I asked for a suggestion, and a couple people recommended Mulvad, so I gave Mulvad a thing. Now it's not as cheap; it's $5 a month or $5.50 a month. I just bought a year, and it was really simple to set up. It uses WireGuard or OpenVPN. You have the option, and it just works well. You know, even in one of the things that I always had a problem with like when I used PIA in the past, all their instructions are for Ubuntu, right? And you can get it to work. You can work on,
and they're hard coded. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can get it to work on like Arch or whatever, but it doesn't. It's not. You can tell that it was meant for Ubuntu. This, I didn't have any problems with this at all. I just downloaded the app from the AUR, launched it, I put in my account number, and it loads. It's there. I've been using like a server from Britain, and speed was really good. Like basically the same speed that I always get. Obviously the latency was a lot worse, but that's gonna happen. So that's just the way it works. So far, I'm very happy with it. Hopefully, I don't get screwed over in like 6 months from now and not like it anymore, because I did pay for a whole year. But it's just that it was easier to pay for a year simply because like my credit card does not allow by default international charges. Like I have that turned off so that I don't, you know, for security reasons. So I had to turn that off in order to get this to go through. And I was like, I don't want to have to do this every month. So I just bought a year, and then I can turn the deny international charges off again. So I don't have to worry about that. So anyways, that is the thingy of the week. Now, coming up next week, I don't actually know what we're going to be talking about. Tyler, do you have one in here about schools becoming more FOSS-oriented? So we're going to be talking about schools and FOSS software. Another one of those topics that probably is not going to be for everybody, but it should be very interesting. So that is it for us coming up this week. Before I go, I'd like to take a moment to thank my current patrons: Robert, Syd, Devon, Patrick, Fred, Kramer, Maeglin, Jackson, Tools, Syd A, CyberGuyLinux, Garrick, Samuel, Mitchel, Archsinner, JDawg, carnondated, Jamie, Shaun, Odin, Martin E, Andy, Ross, Marek, Camp, Josh Early, Peter A, Crucible, Dark Minute 6, Primus, and PM. If you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/LinuxCast. I really, truly do appreciate everyone who supports me on Patreon and on YouTube. And whether, even if it's not monetarily, if you just subscribe, I really, truly do appreciate everybody who's done that. If you want to subscribe to Zany's channel, youtube.com/ZanyOG, he does have a Patreon. You'll have to find that link wherever he has that, because I don't have it memorized. I'm sorry for that.
Don't forget to pimp out the store.
Oh, right, there's links to the store and stuff in the video description, so there is a store there. Tyler, we should really look into putting some more stuff up there, shouldn't we?
Yeah,
we should definitely do that. Anyways, that is it for the Linux Cast. We'll be back next week. We record this live every Thursday at around 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, so if you'd like to watch live and be in the chat, you can do so. We don't pay much attention to the chat, unfortunately. Sorry, guys. Hello, chat. So if we got distracted by the chat, the recording could be 6 hours long. We just sit here and chat. Maybe that's something we do someday, but as it is right now. So anyways, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Boy.